Hello, I'm Dr. Sam Shelton. This is Energy 101. What I'm going to do today at the first module is to give you an overview of what we're going to talk about in this class. That's covering the basics of energy. We'll look at the topics and the discussions that we're going to have. Hopefully, when we're covering one topic and you say, gee, he didn't answer such and such a question, that you'll know from the topics that I'll be talking about it later. So let's just see why we're interested in energy here first, and how I chose the topics in order to try to interpret what's going on in energy in the U.S. in particular today. Energy is in the news a lot. Hardly a day goes by there's not some article in front of any newspaper or that you want to pick up, or online edition that you see that doesn't have an article on energy. Gasoline is approaching $4 a gallon. It's bouncing around down to the mid $3 up to $4. That obviously is news. So that hurts everybody's pocketbook. Means they don't have money to spend on something else. We have the revolutions going on in the Middle East with dictators and governments being overthrown and riots in the street and total destruction of cities and infrastructure. And we had the Fukushima nuclear power meltdown. What does that mean? Does that mean that's the end of nuclear power? And when we look at that closely, we say there's no reason we need to build nuclear power with the kind of risk that we're talking about here. Not only from a safety risk viewpoint, but from a financial risk, because when you're talking about $10 billion or so for a nuclear plant, that's a substantial economic hit when you lose a nuclear plant. Shale gas, you've heard that shale gas will give us energy independence. Is that true or not? We'll talk about that. And we saw with the advent of electric cars that have come out in the last year or two, that electric cars solves our global warming issue from an automobile viewpoint because they have zero emissions, CO2 emissions. We'll talk about that and find out that actually is not quite true when we look at that further. And I'll be presenting a lot of data and a lot of facts that then lead to conclusions. I don't like for my comments to be thought of as opinions, but be fact-based. I like the old saying that I base my opinion on facts, and if the facts change, I'll change my opinion. What do you base your opinion on? So don't get too bored with the facts, but try to interpret them in the context of what it all means when you are looking at questions that come up about oil independence, energy independence, global warming, climate change, revolutions in the Middle East, oil imports, et cetera, et cetera. So why is energy of such interest to us? Why is it on the front page every day? Well, these are the driving issues in energy, the reason that we all get so interested in it. Number one, we have dollars flowing out of the U.S. for imported fuels. And it's about $1 billion a day. That's $1 billion a day flowing out of the U.S. for essentially oil. We'll find that it's an oil issue, and it's not a coal or natural gas, but it's oil. So that obviously is an economic issue. When you have it's responsible for half of our balance of payments deficit that we are running every year. So that's about $400 billion a year that we're shipping out of this U.S. in order to import oil in particular. National security. We learned about the national security of depending on certain regions of the world for oil back in the 70s when OPEC nations in the Middle East didn't like our politics toward an international stance toward Israel. And they cut off our oil supplies, for imported oil supplies. And having lived through that era, as a matter of fact, that's when I got into energy, it was a very difficult time. and we could talk on and on about that issue. And of course, from a security issue, certainly if we ever get into a war and that happens to us, somebody decides that's a substantial supplier to us to cut off their oil supplies to us, it'll have a great national security issue. And finite oil resources. What's the situation there? You know, we talk about running out of oil. Are we in danger of running out of oil? And if we do, obviously, we got some serious problems there. We got environmental issues that I've mentioned briefly. We got air pollution, ground pollution, climate change, and water issues. There's a big linkage between water consumption and availability and energy, as we'll learn later on. So those are the reasons that we're so interested in energy and why it tends to be on our political radar almost every day. So just running through some of the topics in a broad way, we'll talk about energy in society, where we use our energy and why we use it, energy in the economy, the linkage there. We'll talk about energy supply type and source, what types of energy do we use and where do they come from. We'll talk about the pricing of energy. We'll talk about renewable sources for energy. Ethanol is a renewable source. Wind is renewable, solar, and ocean energy. We're not getting any energy essentially from ocean at this point, but ethanol, wind, and solar are beginning to supply some energy that makes some difference. We'll look at the physical laws of energy. What are the limitations that laws of nature put on us about what technologies can we explore and what is possible and not possible. We look at electric power technologies. When we need all the electric power we use for various things, from lighting to electric motors to computers, where do we get that electricity from and what's the technologies to produce that electricity and what's the fuel source. Transportation technologies, that's mainly oil-oriented. We use most of our oil for transportation. And then energy efficiency. There's lots of ways we can reduce our energy consumption by using that energy more efficiently. So we'll hit that topic also. So those are some of the topics that we'll cover in a broad sweep manner. Some of the conclusions we'll reach, that just to tease you a little bit, is that energy use is tightly coupled to the economy. It's linked. How much energy we use is coupled to our economy. If we improve the economy, the energy consumption goes up. National security is linked to oil imports specifically. Oil is not saved. This one might surprise some people. Oil is not saved by wind energy, solar energy, and nuclear energy. We'll find out why, but just in a nutshell, it's because we don't use any oil to produce electricity, and all of those technologies produce electricity. We'll get into that more as we move through. Electric cars, it turns out, do not reduce CO2 emissions, and that's because they may not come out of a tailpipe on the car, but they get electricity from the grid. That electricity has to be generated back at the plant, and CO2 emissions occur there. There's lots of long-term options to change that, but for the next 10 or 20 years, that's just the reality. And finally, there's no silver bullet for an energy solution. So we've got to take a look at all of these technologies and all the options in order to figure out what the best energy policy should be and develop an energy policy that works. So that's a big overview of what we'll be talking about, and I hope you find it interesting and stay with us. Thank you.